Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and we're excited to have you joining us today in our webinar, in our webcast where we're talking about the hidden costs of DevOps tool chains. My name is John Jeremiah, and I'm a product manager here at GitLab, and I'm joining you today from Austin, Texas. But before we get started, I want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We have a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and if you want, click on that, post your question, and we will have time at the end for questions. So you can get your questions in with Chris, and we'll be glad to field those. As we kick off, I want to welcome our guest speaker, Chris Condo from Forrester. Chris researches DevOps tool chains, focusing on continuous integration and continuous delivery, as well as software development strategies for enabling those techniques and practices. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Could you go to the next slide so we show the agenda?
You bet.
So our agenda today is looking into the costs of DevOps tool chains, which is based on research that we commissioned with Forrester and Chris to look at and understand what's happening in the market. And Chris's presentation and discussion will be about how you manage your tool chain before it manages you. And I want to start off with a question, I guess. And Chris, I often will talk to IT leaders about their challenges and the things they're wrestling with, and they talk about how they need to focus on more than just IT. They talk about their focus on business and digital transformations. What kind of things are you seeing in your research?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. So we've done research across the industry, across various industry verticals, and what we're seeing is that many teams are being swamped by new technologies. They understand the need to go fast, but they're having difficulty getting there. And I have some interesting research that kind of backs that up with data and also insight from our various clients. So let me just kick this right off. So first of all, I'm Chris Condo. I'm a principal analyst with Forrester, and it's really my pleasure to be here with John Jeremiah, and I want to thank GitLab for inviting me. At Forrester, we work with business and technology leaders to develop customer-obsessed strategies that drive growth. And I always start with a slide, even though it's kind of our unique value proposition, because we want to talk about customer-obsessed strategies. You have customers, whether they're internal or external. We are all running businesses, and our job is to keep our customers happy, regardless of what industry that's in. And more recently, that's all becoming a part of the whole digital landscape of serving your customer in a digital way. So let's kind of jump into it, right? So one of the interesting things about software development and DevOps in general is that teamwork and tools are paramount to accelerating software delivery. You need to have teamwork, you need to have collaboration, you need to have people be able to work together, but they all need tools to get the job done. And just like these folks at the pit stop here, everyone's working very hard and in unison to kind of keep the motor running and keep the driver on the road. It's paramount to staying competitive in today's digital landscape. So what's kind of going on from a software perspective? Well, we have this whole notion of digital transformation where every single company now needs to be concerned with a digital platform, a digital strategy. If you were selling insurance, maybe software was something you did in the back office. Well, now software is something that you have to do to actually deliver that policy to your customers. You need to deliver it in a delightful way that they can then receive, they can purchase, they can check out policies. They have a mobile app, they have a tablet, they have a web site. Maybe there's even IoT devices to help monitor cars to make sure people are driving safely to bring down their insurance premiums. Maybe people are willing to take that type of strategy if it means getting a lower policy. Well, those are digital transformational things that are happening. When the world's leading online retailer, Amazon, buys a grocery store that you can walk to and use your Prime membership, then you realize that digital transformation isn't just in the cloud, it's actually hitting home in your local grocery store. And then when you combine that, though, with the customer experience, the need to delight customers, because more and more customers are in the driver's seat. If they don't like your particular digital presentation of your company, if they don't like the way you're presenting your products or your services, they can just uninstall your app and they can install a new one. it's as easy as that. And then they'll downvote you, and then you'll have to deal with the consequences. So customer experience, customer choice, the customer really is in the driver's seat. And that's what's driving companies to realize that digital transformation is needed. And both of these things are combining to really put pressure on software development teams to improve and accelerate their feature release cycle. So the interesting thing, though, and maybe a paradox of some sort, is that even though companies realize they need to go faster, they need to bring more innovation to the market, what we're seeing over the last 5 years is that most companies are at this little point at the top of this slide, and this line graph is we average 1 release per quarter. Even though most companies should be able to release code in a day if they have to, or less, for a critical issue, they can't. They're stuck, many of them, only able to push code out on a quarterly basis. And it just drops off after you get faster than a quarter. You go to release per month, release per week. And so this trend is really quite troubling. And it's like, well, what's going on? There's definitely technology available. There's definitely tools available. People recognize these needs to work faster, but for some reason they're not able to go faster. So the data is quite intriguing here and maybe kind of counter what most people might think. Now, let's take a look at just 2018, 2019. So finally, after this 5-year drought of people being stuck in quarterly releases, we are seeing that more teams are able to release at a faster cadence. But that cadence is still quite slow in comparison to what the industry leaders are doing, which is we release many times per day. Releasing many times per day is in the 1 or 2 percentiles. Maybe it's doubled from 1 to 2%, but you really want to see that at a much higher percentage. And it's true, people will argue and say, you don't need to release every day. And what I say is, that's great. You don't need to release a new feature every day, but if you had to release a fix, could you do it in a day? Could you do it in an hour? Could you get that stuff out the door to fix a critical issue or to prevent cascading outages? And a lot of times they can't. The answer is no, because they don't have the right tools and technology, or they're swamped by too many tools and technology and can't work their features, can't work their code through their tool chain. So let's talk about being agile, because that's all about the teamwork. That's all about being adaptive. A half of the companies that we've interviewed say that most of their organization, greater than 75%, has adopted agile. Now, this is from 2017. We need to get some more recent data, and hopefully this number's gone up. But that is a nice big shift from before, where less than half would say that they're using agile. And in fact, in 2013, the differences was like most, 25% of the companies, or how do I want to say it? Less than half of the companies would say that a quarter of their team or less is using agile. So it's really kind of a confusing set of numbers. I'm getting tongue-tied myself trying to talk about it, but it's a good swing. More people are doing agile. But here's another interesting thing, right? So you think about, all right, we have new tools, we have new technology, we realize that going faster is important, we realize that being collaborative and whatnot is important, yet when you look at, break down the various technologies, which of the following software development practices does your development team currently use, what do we see? Continuous integration at 31%. That's really low. That number should be at 100%. Formal code review or manual inspection reviews, right? There's another case where everybody should have somebody that they can then double check their code, make sure that their logic is correct. There should be some form of code review, maybe not for every single piece of code, but that should be higher than 31%. And so even though people said they were doing agile, daily scrum and stand-up meetings is 28%. So those numbers, when you ask them, break them down, really show that there's some dysfunction going on in our software delivery process, where even though teams are saying they're doing things in a more automated way, or they're releasing code a certain way, or they're being more agile, the actual practices, the individual practices, when you break it down, are very, very small. And at the very bottom, we see like experimentation at 16% with A/B testing. And so it just shows you that there are teams, that the vast majority of the clients that we are interviewing, which is over 3,000 developers, are still in a rather immature state of adopting what I would call modern application delivery. So Here's what's going on, though. Here's some of the factors that people are telling us, and this is sort of combined with some of the research that we've been doing with GitLab, and it's really been eye-opening. 71% of the people that we surveyed agree governance and end-to-end visibility of software delivery are major challenges. So what does that mean? How does that manifest itself? If you have end-to-end visibility of your tool chain, what does that mean? That means there's probably someone manually looking at things to make sure that only the right code's going out the door. That means maybe there's manual stopgaps to make sure that compliance is being met, because the tool chain itself doesn't provide that kind of visibility. Here's another one. Many estimate managing tool chains consumes 10% of their development team. Well, that's a real problem. If you were only working at 90% capacity because 10% of your team is busy working on the tool chain, how can you possibly get code out the door? How can you go at full speed and full cadence if you're constantly stopping to fix your tool chain? I mean, it's like driving on the highway and every 10 miles you have to pull over and check the dipstick to make sure you're not low on oil, or to make sure that your car's not overheating. That's a real problem. It takes a long time to go on vacation if you're stopping every 10 miles. Your whole team is just asking, are we there yet? And then, when your tool chain maintains security differently, it complicates access control, right? So what does that mean? When you don't have a nice, secure tool chain, when you have a bunch of diverse tools, it just means that there's a lot of concern about the security. 67% agree that handoffs between teams using different tools slows down delivery. So imagine you've got a team that's doing design, you've got a team that's doing some coding, you've got a team that's doing some testing, you've got your infrastructure team, maybe you've got a security team. There's all these handoffs going on. How much time is that code just sitting there waiting for someone to pick it up and look at it, or import it into whatever tool they're doing, or have them come over and say, geez, I can't look at it on my particular screen. Can I look at it over your shoulder because my tool can't read your application? So now what's going on? You've handed something off, and instead of that person working in parallel, you're both working together on it and chewing up even more cycles. So let's take a look at this research that we've done with GitLab. It's really quite exciting. It's really quite interesting. The respondents, manager, team, architect, director, those are the main people that responded to this. Also some people at the C-suite and vice president. The job function, IT and infrastructure operations, application development, those are the two top ones, with enterprise architect right behind that. So we've got some real good, high level, but not too high level view of what's going on with today's tool chain management, and maybe some insight into what's going on and why things aren't going quite as fast as we want them to. And then company size and geographic dispersion. Not the whole world, but a pretty good chunk of it, United States and Europe. And then the company sizes range from 1,000 up to 20,000 or more. So a really good slice of what's going on in today's DevOps world. And so let's just jump right into it. First thing that we've discovered is that teams have too many tool chains and too many tools to manage, right? So here's the question we asked. To the best of your knowledge, how many different software delivery tool chains does your software organization maintain? And if you look at this, right, you say, all right, well, one tool chain, 22%. So one fifth of all the respondents have one tool chain to worry about. Everybody else has multiple tool chains to worry about. So two tool chains, 34%. So that's 56% right there. That means that 44% have two or more tool chains that they have to manage. And that could certainly end up becoming a complex issue, especially when you multiply it by the number of tools that they need to manage. The vast majority, 44%, have between 1 and 5 tools. So that could indicate a couple of things. Either they have a pretty simplistic tool chain and can't do a lot of automation, or they have a pretty right-sized tool chain up to 5 tools maybe, that's getting the job done. But most people have 6 or more tools. So if you think about the fact that you probably have an agile planning tool and a CI tool and some testing tool at minimum, then when you multiply that by the number of tool chains, it's easy to see how some teams have maybe 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 different discrete software development tools that they have to manage, they have to integrate, they have to deal with from team to team to figure out how to get their work done. And it easily manifests itself in the fact that there's just a lot to manage, on top of the fact that you're trying to get work done. How do teams end up with so many tools, you might ask? Well, some of the drivers to the expansion of the tools within the tool chain are organic growth and maturity of the CI/CD automation market, right? At one time, there was just CI tools. You had automated build with make, and then you did continuous integration, and then maybe you did some unit test. Well, now there's shift left performance testing. There's scanning for security. There's functional test automation. There's all sorts of test management tools that can bring things into the continuous integration cycle. There's new technologies like building Docker and deploying to Kubernetes. There's all sorts of agile tools. There's collaboration tools. It just keeps on going and going. It's a good thing that we have these tools, but it puts a lot of pressure, right? The other interesting thing is the greater awareness of test automation and all these other things that we just talked about, right? Those sort of tools, everybody wants them, everybody needs them, but they do end up coming at a cost, right? And so if you think about, that's great. So let's say we had one tool chain that had like 15 tools on it. That doesn't seem too hard to manage, but what about the different number of tool chains? Well, think about it. We're pushing down team autonomy, right? We're telling people, hey, go do your own thing. Push down authority to the teams. Well, those teams are picking up the mantle of autonomy and they're selecting their own tool chains. But while it helps them in a localized manner, it might not help the overall strategy of the organization. The other interesting thing is digital transformation is driving a greater diversity of tech stacks, right? If you think about my insurance example, well, you have your website, you have your mobile site, you have tablet, and now we're getting IoT sensors that ride along with cars to see if you're a good driver to help, maybe improve your insurance policy. Maybe there are other things coming down the road that are further channels from which data must be gathered, inputs from users must be gathered. Not only are these companies that are going through digital transformation dealing with B2C issues, they're also dealing with B2B issues, and they're integrating these tools directly into their ERP systems and whatnot, logistical systems. There's all sorts of integration that's going on in these tech stacks. And the last one about what drives number of tool chains is probably the more depressing one, is enterprise silos. Those still exist. Whether these companies grew through acquisition or whether they thought they would be doing a good job by compartmentalizing different functions, these different functions each have their own management, their own engineering leadership, and they all choose best what they think their tools are. Unfortunately, they're not looking over the wall to see what their neighbors are doing, and oftentimes they end up making things worse by picking tool chains that aren't compatible with each other.
Say, Chris, I think it's amazing the number of tool chains that people have in their environment and their infrastructure. And from my experience as an enterprise IT leader, I understand the silos and I understand how they got there. And it's usually with the best of intentions. They're trying to grow fast. We want teams to be autonomous and make decisions. What sort of challenges have you seen when you did the research? Have you seen problems emerge, common challenges or problems that come up? And one last thing before you go on. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window in the webinar, and we'll address questions towards the end. We have time for it. But Chris, what do you see as research from challenges and problems that people have you discovered?
Hey, John, that's a great question. So the results are quite interesting. One of the biggest problems and challenges that teams have, is we ask them, well, who's ultimately responsible for maintaining your tool chain? And 40% say their development teams do. Well, if your development team is maintaining your tool chain, and chances are you have more than one tool chain, and that tool chain has 6 or 7 tools, then your development team is dealing with 18, dozens of tools. Well, what are they working on? They're working on the tool chain. They're not working on the product. They're not delivering the transformative services and experiences that the business would like them to do. They're toiling with the tooling itself to try to make that experience, help that experience get out the door. Release teams and DevOps teams, 31%. So, in some ways, maybe that's a better place for this responsibility to rest because those teams are purpose-built to help manage that. But at the same time, it's obvious that that's a big burden on them. And then software tool teams and operations teams. Well, those are teams also, but the operations team isn't really designed to manage tool chains. It's just something that sort of fell on their lap because oftentimes they're in charge of administration. Well, if they're administering your servers and they're dealing with, authentication and authorization and onboarding new employees or managing, your cloud systems, they don't have time to be managing your tools either. So the reality is that when you push these tools onto the development teams, it really slows down progress. And you might ask, well, why is it being pushed onto the tool team? Well, the problem is that these tools are sophisticated. And so here's the interesting upshot that sort of correlates with this development team heavy kind of intrusion, is that integrating those tools becomes a labor-intensive challenge. Here's the question: which of the following best describes the degree of integration your organization software delivery toolchain has today? And it's like, our toolchain is integrated with a combination of plugins and scripts. Well, plugins and scripts are managed and written by developers. They're not managed by, operations folks or other kind of people. It actually requires someone with software development expertise to manage these tools. So no wonder the burden of it is lying on those folks. Or our toolchain is integrated by well-defined APIs. Again, that's a nice way to do it. You plug it together, but the percentage drops precipitously, right? And then our toolchain is integrated manually via hard-coded custom integration tools. Well, you can take number 3, which is, 23%, and then the first one, 29%, add those together, because those two things fall squarely on the backs of the developers. And then, the one near the bottom, we have an out-of-the-box software delivery system that's completely integrated. Those are the people that are like, hey, we're just working. We don't have to do that. And that's kind of like the nirvana space. But that is the minority, the vast minority, less than 1/5 or maybe 1/5 or less, have that particular situation going on. 80% of the teams that we talk to have some software development experience required. And then, again, so this sort of like a cascading failure almost, right? Skill gap emerges as teams struggle to maintain the vast number of discrete tools in their integrations. So which of the following challenges does your team currently face with its tool chain? And the number one thing is insufficient skills, expertise, or resources to integrate those tools, or insufficient skills, expertise, resources to maintain those and integrate those tools. So again, 46%, 44%, those are things that are falling squarely on the backs of developers, because those are the folks that have the right experience to manage these things, and they have to do so because they are manually integrating these tools together. So the whole thing is really all tied up in a knot, which is probably, at least strongly correlated with why teams are stuck in this quarterly release cycle. They can't go faster, they can't get code out the door because they're too busy dealing with these tools.
Chris, it's interesting as you talk about this. It's almost like they're having to fix the plumbing as they do the work, or building it as they're not focusing on business value. The thing I didn't see, or one of the things I think I hear people talk a lot about, is the importance of security, and sometimes it's DevSecOps. Did in the study and your research, how have you seen that play out in security, compliance, et cetera?
Yeah, great question. Yes. Building the plumbing while you're using it, that sounds like a scary thing. So one of the interesting things that we see is that, hold on a second, let me get the right slide here, is that IT professionals are struggling to maintain secure tool chains. In fact, which of the following process challenges does your team currently face with its tool chain? The number one thing that they struggle with is ensuring security across the tool chain, or lack of visibility into the process of maintaining the tool chain. So that tells me two different things, kind of from an analysis perspective. One is the different number of tools, each with its own system of authentication and authorization, is difficult to plumb together to make sure that everybody is properly authenticated, properly authorized to access the assets that they should have access to. So that's one challenge. And then because that's a challenge, it usually leads to sort of a lazy way out of giving everybody admin privileges, or it's so complicated to understand, it leads to a lack of visibility into maintaining that security or maintaining the tool chain itself, because it's just so many tools, it ends up becoming opaque. And so you just hope that everything's done right. You cross your fingers that you're never going to have somebody break into your tool chain and insert malicious code. And meanwhile, it just has everybody sitting on their hands hoping it's going to work out well. And, that's not a way to run a business. It's not a way to manage your security policy. And it's a surefire way to sort of almost guarantee a future hack in the future.
That's interesting, and I can see how this proliferates and causes those problems with security and compliance and management. So it seems dire. What did you discover? Solutions? Are people solving this and managing it better? Are there best practices that you've discovered?
Yes. So the interesting thing that we discovered is that IT professionals see benefits from out-of-the-box tool chains that come already integrated. And so the idea that you can get an integrated tool chain that does what you need to get done, it has the capability, it has some open standards that allows you to pick and choose what you want to use, but for the most part, all hangs together. What they see is improved quality, improved security, improved productivity, and improved revenue. Right? So if you think about that, improved quality, well, that's great for your product manager. It's great for your customers because they want a good quality experience. So that's great. Almost half of the teams that are using these tools are seeing better quality. Improved security. Almost half of the teams are seeing improved security because they're using a single tool chain rather than a diverse set of tool chains. So that's making your CISO happy. Improved developer productivity, well, that's making your dev manager happy. It's making the CTO happy because the developers are spending less time on tools and more time on getting work done. And increased revenue, which is something I didn't expect to see. I expected some of these other things, but increased revenue is really quite startling. Close to 40% said that they saw increased revenue from using these out-of-the-box tool chains. So that just means that the ability to be more productive, the ability to have greater transparency and visibility, ease of use, all of those things that help unstick sticky and frictionful processes are really helpful in getting the whole gears of business moving forward. And then the rest of these all, also very good. Improved compliance, time to value, lower costs, cost savings, and so forth. And so, that's really quite a benefit, quite a surprising benefit. And the interesting thing, it's not just a benefit to the software development team, it's a benefit to the entire organization, to the entire business. So that's really a good thing to say.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not just about developers and just the developers, it's impacting the whole organization. It's amazing how something like this could have that kind of impact so broadly. One of the things that's happening, I think, in the industry a lot, and it's, I talk to a lot of people about, where moving to the cloud, right? They're going to go cloud native. They're going to move their work to the cloud. We're seeing it happen everywhere. Did you see themes or trends around moving to the cloud that impacted this as well?
I did. So when we asked customers of the benefits you realize from a new out-of-the-box toolchain management system, which do you see as having the greatest impact on your business? And I thought it was going to be something about productivity, but it wasn't. It was about the ability to deploy to any target environment or cloud. So 77% agree that their organization is moving to the cloud and want to avoid cloud lock-in. And so that's really quite interesting. So that correlates with that other question that we asked, is that, if you see things moving to the cloud, then it's natural that you think that having a tool chain that allows you to be multi-cloud is imperative to your business. And that's exactly what clients are telling Forrester as well, is that they don't want to necessarily be locked into one cloud. I mean, certainly there are organizations that have just decided that that is the most cost-efficient approach to them. That's the way they want to go about it. But there are many, many businesses that say they don't want to be on a single cloud, they want to be multi-cloud, or that even that their own corporate governance requires them to have multiple suppliers, and so they have to be multi-cloud. And so this also allows these teams to allow the competitive landscape in the cloud industry to unfold in front of them and let them make the best decisions at the best time that their business needs. So that's really quite interesting, I think. The other interesting thing is what else is important about the multi-cloud is that you have to worry about different opinionations of these different cloud platforms, right? So if you look at an AWS platform, there's Lambda functions. If you look at an Azure platform, they have Azure functions. If you go to Google, there's a different kind of function, right? So, do you want to be that opinionated that you're locked in with those different types of provider constructs, or do you want to have something that's a little bit separate from that, allowing you to deploy to different clouds, allowing you to use the most cost-effective servers or services or whatever you want to use? The other interesting thing is, although they're rare, public cloud outages do happen. Like in February 2017, there was an S3 outage. Slack went down. A lot of other big services went down, and it was all because of a fat thumb on a configuration variable for S3. Azure DevOps has had an outage. All of the cloud platforms have had their share of small outages. If you're running a financial services company, if you're doing currency trading, if you're doing something that requires speed and reliability and uptime, you might not want to bet on a single option. You might want to have a plan B or a plan C to go with it. And maybe you want to share some of the load of your capacity with an on-premise server or a different cloud or some other kind of provider. And so you want to have that option. It is important. It is something that businesses need to think about and consider carefully.
So it's interesting, especially as people are moving from being on-premise to the cloud. It's and how they're doing that, and how important then having a tool chain solution that allows them to go from cloud to cloud and to move. I think that's really powerful and important. As you wrap up, and as we kind of wrap up and thinking about this, and then we'll go to audience Q&A after my next question. But when you do research and you talk to clients about this, what advice do you give them about how they should meet their software delivery challenges for their business? Great question.
So, what can you do? Reduce the diversity of tool chains within the enterprise, right? I just feel duplication of functionality is wasteful. When I first started doing research as an analyst at Forrester, the first report I did was on cloud-hosted software delivery tool chains. And when we talked to some of the larger companies like financial institutions, insurance companies and whatnot, what they said was that their biggest challenge was wrangling the diverse set of tools. It wasn't just creating a headache because they had different tool chains for every team. They had different versions of the same tool chain. And so it was a real headache. And so they were trying to come up with a strategy that allowed some freedom, but at the same time created standards. So one of the things that they were looking for and that I recommend is, look for tools that have open standards. Look for tool chains that help simplify security and risk compliance. Look for tools that allow you to deploy where it's most advantageous to your business. Whether it's the cloud or on-premise or both, or a private cloud. Will the tool chain be easy to maintain, yet still provide a complete CI/CD solution, right? So those are important things to ask yourself as you're going through your evaluation, as you're looking at the landscape of DevOps tools today. And so you don't want to just make knee-jerk reactions and say, oh, we're just going to let everybody do their own thing. And then you don't also want to make a knee-jerk reaction and say everybody's going to do the same thing. There might be perfectly good reasons to have 2 or more tool chains if you have 2 or 3 distinct tech stacks, but maybe within those tech stacks, you don't need to have 2 or 3 tool chains. Or better yet, if you can find a tool chain that can handle all your tech stacks, maybe you don't have to worry about that. And so, in summary, what I say is that software delivery automation is a business differentiator, right? If you can get innovation out to your customers faster, you're going to have happier customers. Custom best-of-breed tool chains provide differentiation, but it comes at a cost to the business, right? That cost gets multiplied when there are multiple tool chains. And choosing a modern single tool chain solution can be beneficial. Less maintenance, open standards, simpler security, less time spent automating, more time delivering value, and the freedom to host and deploy as necessary. Those are just really, important things, and I just think that are critical when you're moving forward in your modernization efforts or your tool chain.
This is awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. And I've got a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. If you're interested in downloading and reading the research and the report that Chris has put together, the link is here, and we have a shortcut link that you can just type in. That'll take you to it where you can register and download it. We could also email it to you afterwards if you'd like. Let us know if you'd like that, but you can download it. It's really easy. I got a question that's come in from the audience, and I'm going to read it to you, and I'll let you feel that. It sounds like there's a lot of room for improvement within enterprise development groups with so many different tools. In your research, was there feedback that these teams were looking to become more efficient and improve, or are they looking to maintain the status quo due to the effort, to change? What do you see as what are you seeing enterprises trying to do? Are they trying to become more efficient? And if so, who's leading that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as we see a shift to what I call product-led teams, where there is some autonomy, these teams are constructed of folks that understand the customer. Maybe it's a product management team that's combined with a software development QA team that are also coming together in kind of the DevOps fashion. They are collectively understanding that they need a tool chain that works for all of them. They need a tool chain that is there when they need it, and they don't want to be waiting in queues. They don't want to be waiting for an IT team to have to provision it for them. So they are greatly looking for greater efficiency and greater freedom to get their work done. They don't necessarily want a specific tool chain. They just want one that works for them, that allows them to get their job done more quickly and efficiently, and gets out of their way and doesn't get in their way when they're trying to get their job done. And when you ask these clients, like, all right, well, you have all this technical debt invested in your existing tool chain. When you move to this new tool chain, did you have to bring it all with you? And they say, no, we left it all behind. We never looked back. We're on a modern tool chain now, and we couldn't be happier.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question is about industry trends in DevOps. Are you seeing trends across different industries? Are there some industries that you see lagging versus those that are farther ahead of others in adopting DevOps practices?
Yeah, another great question. So what I see is that in almost every vertical, there's a couple of, sort of like in the forefront leaders, right? So if you look at media, which has been sort of in the forefront to begin with, we have Netflix. If you look at retail, these are all customer, B2C type of plays. You have Amazon. But when it's B2B or, maybe some of the lesser players, like maybe like we talked about insurance or the government or financial services or companies that are in heavily regulated or teams that have a lot of compliance issues, those types of organizations are typically a little bit slower on DevOps. They are very cautious about the tools that they jump to. They also have to go through, oftentimes, approval processes that are arduous. And so what ends up happening is that these guys, these companies, they moved to a tool chain maybe 15 years ago. They went through all this approval process for procurement and whatnot. And now they're marooned on that tool chain because they don't want to have to go through it again. But the reality is that those tool chains are holding them back, and they should really think about modernizing their procurement efforts, modernizing how their organizations think about agile, modernize how they fund all these efforts so that the whole organization becomes agile and thinks about how to collectively move forward rather than just thinking about software development in a tool as an isolated case. think about it as how do we get the whole business to move forward. It's important that we have the best possible platforms and tools to enable our employees to create experiences and deliver them to customers in a cost-effective manner. And when you look at the research that says, revenue is an important factor, business is an important factor, those things should resonate with your CEO, your CTO, and even your shareholders to understand that modernizing your tool chain is a business imperative.
That's interesting, Chris, that you say that, because the next question actually is kind of related, and I loved how you described being marooned on a tool chain. You've kind of like they build it and all of a sudden you can't get out of it. But what advice do you give to organizations and clients when they say, look, we know we have to change? What advice do you give about where they get started or how they get started with this sort of 2.0 transformation or moving to something that's more modern?
That's a great question. So client input tells me that when they try to transform within their organization, it can be very, very difficult. If you don't have a top-down sponsor who says, we're going to modernize how we do software delivery, and then empower the individuals on your team so that they can collectively help you modernize that, sort of like a top-down, bottom-ups approach, then that approach typically doesn't work. It's very hard to go bottom-up and push it out to the rest of the organization. That's a very, very long and difficult journey for companies to go through. What they're doing is they are sidestepping that and sort of creating brand new agile organizations that are building their applications on brand new tool chains. They're not picking off like low-hanging fruit. They're taking very complicated problems and they're bringing them and breaking them off from their monolith or breaking them out of their application tool chain, and they're owning them in these new teams that are proving out the whole process of how does a multidisciplined team actually get work done? How does that team, report metrics? How does that team become output-driven and outcome-driven rather than just work-driven? And those teams have, by and large, actually been successful. And so if you look at some of the other industry examples where if you always try to cherry pick and pick the easy, low-hanging fruit for some of these tools, you'll have naysayers that say, well, that works great for that particular thing, but it won't work for us because we have compliance, or the company sits on our shoulders and you can't possibly modernize this tool chain. It's impossible. Well, those are the things that you want to try to modernize first and just break down the barriers to the naysayers and say, listen, it's great that you're on that 20-year-old tool chain and you're developing in COBOL, but guess what? You can actually do something faster, better, and more modern in this new tool chain. And, you can keep your COBOL if you want to, but you don't have to.
Yeah, no, it's interesting as you say that. I've even talked to customers who said, we have to change our tool chain so we can recruit and retain talent. I've heard people say that where that
is another big thing. Yes, for sure. Yeah. If you don't have a modern shop, you're not going to have a modern workforce.
That's right, and I've heard it multiple times. It's very much a thing. Question about diversity of tools and the cost. So let me read this. The diversity of tools inside a tool chain is a thing, but how about the maintenance of those tools? The tools that evolve rapidly.
Yep. That's a huge problem. So I have a couple of folks that call me that are clients from large national banks, and what they tell me is that they are stuck in a pickle because they have a server that needs to be maintained, for compliance purposes, for SOX compliance. They have to have the most up-to-date version. Yet that software, that CI server, is littered with plugins, and they know that the minute they update it, multiple plugins are going to break. It's going to slow down their progress. It's going to slow down their ability to release code. And so they're constantly struggling with when is the right time to stop our software development process so we can update our tool chain. It's a big headache. And so that maintenance ends up becoming one of the reasons why folks get marooned on these old tool chains and why there's so many tool chains, because they go, all right, well, it's going to be too hard to maintain that one. Well, let's start over again with a new tool chain. And so they do it all over again. And now they have two tool chains that they're marooned to or tied to, and then they do it again. And so that's one of those, sort of dysfunctions of having a tool chain that's so complicated, nobody wants to maintain it. They're all worried about its fragility and the fact that it, trying to keep it all working is just a big pain.
It's sort of like plugging traffic.
Yes.
One last question I think we have, and then I don't know if we'll have more, but I see one more question. We've talked a lot about developers and whatnot and tool chains, et cetera. One of the things and you mentioned it, I think earlier in the presentation, was about quality. And the question is, what are you seeing about the role of QA and testing in the DevOps transformation? What are you seeing with your clients and in the industry?
Yeah, another great question, right? So testing in QA used to be sort of an afterthought. You had maybe less skilled individuals in testing in QA. They would do manual testing. Well, that needs to go out the window, right? When I was at Microsoft, every QA person actually had like a master's in computer science. They were test automation experts. They built test automation frameworks. All the tests were automated. That is the way of the future. That is the way you get an automated tool chain, is that your test team is our developers. Your test team is developing the verification and validation capability of your application. They are very much part of the product team. In fact, when developers and architects are creating new products, bringing in someone with a QA mindset is one of the best things that you can do. They can look at your design. They can be a critical part of thinking about how the design can be more resilient, how it can be more reliable, and how it can be testable. Those folks are experts in understanding how things break. Bring them into the conversation, and then introduce tools that bring them into the automation conversation. All of those minds need to be part of the whole product process. And that's why product teams are so powerful these days, because you not only have just a developer working with an architect, you have a QA-minded person who maybe takes turns with developing code in test-driven development or team development. You have an operations person who understands infrastructure, understands scale and reliability, how switching systems work, how routers work. Those are all various levels of detail that people know at a high level, but they don't know at a low level. And it's important to have that expertise in. It's important to have an expert who understands security and what it means to your application. How do you test for security? How do you develop for security? How do you build it in from the beginning and not stitch it on at the end? Those are all really important pieces. And more frequently now, those people are getting drawn into the tool chain conversation, because the tool chain itself and these bespoke kinds of tool chains are hand cobbled and hand built. So if you can make the tool chain sort of like self-sufficient and managing itself, you've just taken a big burden off those teams of what they worry about and what they have to think about, and put it right back onto the tool chain and allow folks to think about the products they're creating and the value they're delivering to their customers.
Fantastic. Chris, hey, thank you very much. I don't see any new, wait, I think I saw one more question.
Sorry.
I do got one more question. Is it cost effective to have these tools on the cloud, or self-hosted?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every company needs to make that value proposition decision themselves. We talked to a very small company, 10 developers. They were developing on-premise, and they had to deal with multiple licenses. They had to have staff to maintain those tools. And what they discovered is that moving to the cloud allowed them to transition that staff that was managing tools to managing their scale on that cloud provider, and that they don't have to worry about maintaining their tools anymore. The tools are automatically updated. So it allowed them to actually be more cost effective, and they actually felt worth the money they were paying for those particular licenses. I've talked to very large companies who pay a per user, who pay a server and agent pricing for their particular CI tool, and they say that's very expensive. They've moved to a per user model, and they said that still is very expensive, because more and more what we're seeing is that these multifaceted teams need multiple users, but these users aren't full-time developer users like the developer checking in their code every day. They are part-time users who come and look at what is the status of the current workflow? How are we doing on our delivery of value to customers? What's in progress? What's completed? What alerts and alarms are going on? Because we have so many more voices in the conversation that are sort of part-time voices in the tool chain, full-time voices in the product design and development, that's making it kind of a burden for these per user licenses too. So a lot of people are looking at consumption-based models as a way to solve some of those. But consumption-based, the more you build, the more you spend, and it really depends on the dynamics of how you manage your team, what level of sort of effort that you want to take on to maintain versus what level of effort you want to push onto the cloud provider. Some tools like GitLab offer both options, and so I just tell teams like, hey, try them both out. People that have moved to the cloud have said that they felt it was worth it, made it easier. They don't have to worry about maintaining anything. But there are plenty of people who say, I want the control, I want the customization, I want the ability to maintain source code on-premise. And for them, an on-premise tool chain is right. So it all matters. That's a very, a business personal decision, in my opinion.
Cool. Well, Chris, I think I don't see new questions coming in. I think that is where we are at. I want to take a moment and thank you for your insight and sharing your research. It's helped me to learn more, and hopefully it's helped our audience to learn more as well. And for the audience, thank you for your participation. Thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to download a copy of Chris's research, I had the link earlier. I'll tell you the link now. It's at bit.ly/toolchain-study. Or if you want to contact us, we'll be glad to send you a copy of it as well. With that, thank you all so very much for joining us for today's webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you, John. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.